So I have pretty good news. I have pretty good news. So the news is that the discharge petition that was filed last year, July 17th of 2025, by Gregory Meeks of New York, and was championed by Republicans like Brian Fitzpatrick, who is running for re-election in Pennsylvania's 1st, and Don Bacon, who is not running for re-election after taking his House seat from his older brother, who passed away in 2020. This bill had been gathering up discharge petition signatures. For those of you who don't know what a discharge petition is, basically, let's say the House leader, Mike Johnson, does not want to take a popular bill and introduce it on the House floor because he doesn't support it. Let's say that there's a lobbyist that has convinced them that the bill is bad. Let's say he takes money from a certain political action group that wants to stop the bill. Let's say that the president of the United States has asked him to sink it so it doesn't get to his desk. So he has to take the unpopular position of vetoing popular legislation, which was the case for a long time regarding the Epstein files and why Mike Johnson would not swear in a Democrat that had won their election and was waiting to be sworn in. And part of the reason it was being delayed because very clearly he did not want that vote on the Epstein files. A discharge petition essentially says is if you can get a majority of legislators to sign this piece of paper saying there should be a vote on this, there must be a vote on this, then they'll have a vote on it. Regardless on whether or not the House Speaker, Mike Johnson, the leader of the majority coalition, the head honcho in Congress, in the House of Representatives at least, there's going to be a vote on it anyway. Now, this discharge petition had been gathering signatures for the better part of a year, but after gathering every single Democrat, and I want to emphasize that, whatever Democrat is in the House of Representatives that you know of signed on to this discharge petition. And you can scroll and you can see every single signature here. Every single one. You see Pramila Jayapal, Ro Khanna, AOC, Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez. You're going to have Hakeem Jeffries. You're going to have Richie Torres. You're going to have even Vincent Gonzalez, who currently has a yellow rating on our Track Ukraine grading system due to his meeting with sanctioned Russian MPs who champion the war effort, champion the trafficking of Ukrainian children, and help cover up the crimes of the Russian government. Even he, even the worst, I would say probably right now, might be the worst Democrat in the House on the issue of Ukraine. Even he signed on to the discharge petition. I don't know if that was Hakeem Jeffries whipping him into shape, or he was the one that met with the sanctioned Russian MPs, giving it that bipartisan flair because the Democrats needed somebody in the room and he took the hit on it. We don't know that. He hasn't been that descriptive as to why he held that meeting, but even him, from the most progressive House member in the Democratic Party to the most conservative House member, all of them signed on to it. But only two Republicans, Don Bacon and Brian Fitzpatrick, two people who are very, very supportive of Ukraine, and I appreciate that support for Ukraine. But the last discharge petition vote for this legislation that would get aid to Ukraine was given by Kevin Kiley. Now, if you follow Track Ukraine, you would know that we graded Kevin Kiley yesterday. Now, did we grade Kevin Kiley because we had an idea that this was going to happen? Well, yes, that's why we did it. And we were seeing, you know, come on, do it. Support you. Just give him that little shove. Give him a little poke. Come on, Kevin. Come on, Kevin. We're talking about $1.3 billion worth of support, Kevin. $8 billion worth of loans, Kevin. Post-war reconstruction, Kevin. We're talking about more sanctions on the Russians, Kevin, and on the industries that support Russian imperialism in Ukraine, Kevin. Come on, Kevin. Come on, Kevin. You're not even a Republican anymore. You just registered as a Democrat. I mean, not as a Democrat. Oh, let me back up. As an independent, Kevin. Come on, Kevin. And you want to know what? That's what he did. He signed on to the discharge petition and got us just enough, the 218 necessary, to force a vote on this legislation. And so for the first week of June, there is now going to be a vote on Ukraine aid for the first time since Trump has been in office. And I mean a clean Ukraine aid bill. It's not going to be bundled with support for Israel. It's not going to be bundled on immigration. There's not going to be some other part. Oh, it's the Ukraine aid bill and kick a baby in the face bill. I mean, you got to support both of them, or, woo, sucks for you. If you vote against it, you hate Ukraine. If you vote for it, you want to kick a baby, it's good luck. No, it's going to be a clean bill in this discharge petition. So I did not know if this was going to get over the line. I was hoping Kevin was going to do what he was going to do. Thank goodness he did it. Now, so I got to give him that credit. Kevin is going to be running in a difficult race because he is now running in a redistricted California, now, to be honest, gerrymandered California. He is running in a Democrat district because he didn't want to challenge in a vicious Republican primary in a different district for one of the safe Republican seats. So instead, he's running in a seat that should be largely safer for a Democrat. And he's now registering as an independent to try to appeal to these people. And maybe he's being more honest to his personal ideology because, he was supportive of Ukraine before, but that thing we've said on this channel before is ringing true as always. You want to win over the wine moms, say Slava Ukraini, Heroam Slava. Come out there and support Ukraine. Wine moms of America love Ukraine. And so if he wants to win those votes, you got to show that you ain't bought and owned by whatever person's in the White House or whatever the party leadership says. You got to show that you're actually independent. If you're going to make an independent run for office, you got to take independent-like actions. You got to show yourself to be independent. That's what Dan Osborne has to do in his race, and that's what Kevin Kiley has to do in his race, vice versa, as somebody who's going from the Republican ticket to the independent, and Dan Osborne is coming from a Democratic caucus to the independent ticket. So there's a bunch of political calculation reasons as to why he was the final vote and as to why Mike Johnson probably didn't necessarily see this coming. At the end of the day, we got the 218 signatures. I didn't think we were going to get it, but we did. What is the legislation? Well, number one, $1.3 billion of direct aid to Ukraine. That's more than the $400 million we're still waiting to see if it's going to get shot over to the Ukrainians, but there's been some positive attention on that for the previous House bill that was passed. But in this case, $1.3 billion. So this would be the most significant, largest amount of aid sent during the Trump administration to Ukraine. Now, of course, this is not something that is championed by Donald Trump. You can't really give him too much credit here, but that's what it would be. On top of that $1.3 billion worth of aid, there's another $8 billion worth of lend-lease authority that would allow the Ukrainians to essentially take out a loan to continue to fund their own defense. So in total, we're talking about $9.3 billion worth of capital in a combined aid and loan program. On top of that, we're not done. We're also talking about post-war reconstruction. On top of that, we're also talking about sanctions on the Russian Federation, sanctions on the industries that Russia uses to perpetuate the war machine, to demolish civilians' homes, to try to conquer territories in Ukraine and carry on the war effort. So, is this the bill that I would want if I could sit down and craft Ukraine aid legislation that I think would bring about an end to the war and help advance us closer to an end to the war? No. But considering the circumstances and the fact that I did not expect us to have any vote on Ukraine until at least after the midterms, if we get that, this is quite significant. This is quite significant, even if it doesn't pass. And it's significant even if it doesn't pass because it shows that there's enough support in the House to get around the House Speaker for Ukraine. It is one thing to have support for an issue. It is another thing to have so much support for an issue that the leader of the House majority cannot stop you from getting support from Ukraine, cannot stop the tide of forcing a vote where now a bunch of Republicans in a midterm year is going to have to make difficult decisions about getting support to Ukraine, where they either have to anger their base, much of which does not support Ukraine, by voting in favor of it, or anger the general electorate, which is very, very supportive of Ukraine. Now, of course, there are Republicans that support Ukraine. It depends on the district. Brian Fitzpatrick district, obviously, in Pennsylvania is first is supportive of Ukraine. But at the end of the day, Mike Johnson didn't want to put himself in that difficult position. He didn't want to put the Republican Party in that difficult position. And he certainly did not want to contradict the do-nothing agenda of Donald Trump when it comes to this war. The agenda that has continued to drag out this bloodletting day after day after day after day after he promised either a quick end or quick support and then delivered on neither, and has instead delivered 3 failed ceasefires: a civilian ceasefire that failed, an energy ceasefire that failed, and a Victory Day ceasefire that failed after 24 hours. Hell, I mean, the energy ceasefire failed after 1 hour, so I guess that's an improvement. Mind you, the Victory Day ceasefire wasn't even respected on the front line. The Russians continued offensive operations, continued infantry assaults, and if one guy is rushing towards another guy with a rifle trying to kill him, I don't call that a ceasefire. You could at best call that a long-range ceasefire. So I would say that forcing this now, even if it does not pass the Senate and get to the president's desk, or the president vetoes it, which I think that last one is probably the biggest risk for this legislation, or them trying to find some other way to throw a wrench into this, some legislative tool that I have yet to think of. You know, maybe Mike Johnson's going to come to work one day and say, I know we were supposed to have the Ukraine aid vote today, but excuse me, my tummy hurts. So could we maybe schedule that for 2040? I don't know. But at the end of the day, it is a show that there's not much they can do to stop that upswell in support for Ukraine, even when they control every chamber. The House of Representatives, the Senate, the Supreme Court, and the presidency. Donald Trump can still not stop that upswell in support for Ukraine. We got more Pew Research data recently on support for Ukraine. The support for Ukraine is increasing right now, actively. Every day that passes, every day of failed policy implementation, every day of bloodletting, every day of failed negotiations, every day of Donald Trump going to the negotiations saying, oh, gee willikers, I'm going to go to the humiliation factory. I sure hope I don't get humiliated today. Each day that happens, it just gets more supporters of Ukraine. It gets more people to realize, oh, so it wasn't just as simple as going and talking to the Russians. We went and talked to the Russians, and they said, war, war, war. Well, but sir, could we please, how about maybe, we could meet some we could meet some middle, war, war, war. And it's like, okay, well, that's kind of hard to negotiate with. Well, how about if we offered a investment package and we could, maybe work with resource. Sorry, is my mic not working, Mr. American? War. And so after 400, and who cares amount, over 400 days, we're going on 500 days now of failed policy. The American people support Ukraine more than, let me give you one example. There is more support for a surge in aid to Ukraine, and the Democratic Party is just one microcosm of this, than at any other point. February 2024, 23, 24, 25. Right now, there are more Americans saying in the Democratic Party, but there are more Americans generally even, but there is a higher percentage than at any other point in the Democratic Party saying we need to surge aid, not just continue aid, but surge it. This is the political environment that we're in. This is the wins that I felt when I was seeing the difference between some people who are running for office, some people who are in office, and what everybody believes on the street. I'm not claiming that every American supports aid to Ukraine. I am claiming that there is enough Americans who see the nonsense of our current policy, that sees our policy as the pro-war policy, the policy that continues the war, carries out the war, drags out the war and makes the war bloodier and makes the consequences for Ukraine more severe, the consequences for Europe more severe, and makes it more likely we get dragged into a war by allowing the Russians to move into NATO states that we have alliance structures with, bounded alliance structures with, things that would base our credibility on the line if those countries were attacked. That policy isn't working. Trump was not able to make peace in Ukraine. Hell, Trump's got it. He's starting wars. He's not ending them. He's starting wars. He ain't ending them. And so that upswing has led to also people like Kevin Kelly saying, you know what? I feel that wind. I feel that shift. I see what people are doing. They're bringing up noise online, bringing up noise at our local meetings with, the people. When I go and I meet those I'm supposed to represent. All 800,000 of them on average. We need to uncap the House. Other topic, but point is, the momentum has shifted. The vibes have shifted. Not only when it comes to the United States, mind you. In Europe right now, Viktor Orban is gone. The biggest opponent of Ukraine in the entirety of the European Union after 16 years of rule has been forced out in humiliating fashion, overwhelming fashion, despite Donald Trump's direct endorsement. Despite all these different fools coming out and endorsing him. Donald Trump, Benjamin Netanyahu, Putin's press secretary. I mean, it was literally the worst gaggle of just of the worst people coming together to try to prop him up, and the Hungarians said no, and that got over $105 billion worth of aid shifted over to the Ukrainians. And now this still shows $105 billion when we're talking about the Europeans, and in the United States we're talking about $1.3 billion worth of aid. We're talking about $8 billion on top of that when it comes to Lend-Lease. Like, the difference in conversations between the European continent and us is still distant, but it shows that there is a momentum shift. Not only when it comes to Russians slowing on the battlefield, not only when it comes to the aid coming from the European Union, but also when it comes to the United States. I'm not saying that everybody in 2026, going into 2027, is going to be voting based upon their support for Ukraine in the midterms. The things that are going to direct the vast majority of votes this midterm is going to be the economy, and can you guess what the last one is? Can you guess? That's right, the economy. I was trying to think of another one, but no, there's not even another one to think about. The economy. That's going to be the big one. There's other ones as well. You know, if there's another ICE shooting, obviously that could have an impact. There's a million different scandals when it comes to Trump's admin. There's a million different things that Trump could say that could, I would say picking a fight with the Pope when there's a lot of Catholic Americans, these are things that could have a negative impact. But ultimately, his economic mismanagement and him entering a war with a million different objectives that was not clearly communicated, that the American people largely do not support, which is only worse in the economy, that's not helping too much either. Not to mention all the promises that he made that are not being delivered on, like the war in Ukraine not being over. So I think that when the midterm comes around, we'll have the best opportunity post-midterm, depending on those results, to get a larger aid package passed. But now we're in a scenario where we could send a message to the Russians before the midterms, before we have a Democratic House or possibly Senate majority that would not block aid to Ukraine, because Hakeem Jeffries is not Mike Johnson and Chuck Schumer is not Thune, even though Thune is more supportive of Ukraine than Mike Johnson. Now, I want to read to you guys what Kevin Kelly said as to why he did this. Recent successes of Ukraine have created a window of opportunity for peace, but the disruption of the last ceasefire proved that leverage is needed for the success of diplomacy. Russia's violation of ceasefires negotiated by the U.S. president does have an impact. And the U.S. president, what was his response to Russia violating the ceasefire? Does anybody in here know what his response was when the Russians violated the Victory Day ceasefire? There was no response. But just because there was no response from Donald Trump, who didn't care about him and the whole country being disrespected, that our treaties, our agreements, our ceasefires that we negotiate are worthless, that they can be violated in an instant, that Donald Trump will ignore it, no worries. That does not apply to every other politician in the country. The bill is to be brought up for consideration in May. Although the chances of, oh no, they're reading a bunch of the other stuff. Anyway, but that's the reason he gave. The reason he gave was the violation of the ceasefire and that we need to give Ukraine leverage. Which, I mean, we've been talking about this on the show forever. If the Russians think they can keep carrying out the war, they will keep carrying out the war. You cannot remove pressures on the Russians that make it easier to carry out the war, and then that makes them stop the war. You do not play patty cake with Putin and assume that's going to drag him over to your position. This is a naive way of viewing the war, and I would say this is even a childish way of viewing the war. I'm sorry, but the vibe at Burning Man and the vibe at high-level diplomatic negotiations where millions upon millions of lives are on the line are very different. Okay? Very different. Okay, we're not negotiating with John Lennon. We're negotiating with a former KGB agent who wrote in the months leading up to the war that Ukraine could only exist in two ways, either as an extension of Russia or not at all. So, what are the odds of this passing? What are the odds of this actually getting through the House, getting through the XYZ? The House, it has the best chances in the House. If you can get 218 signatures on the discharge petition, then you at least should have 218 votes, which is a majority, enough of a majority to pass it over to the Senate. Now, the Senate, that's less certain, but there are a majority of senators in the Senate that support Ukraine. There are. So I don't think that if the vote passes in the House, which I believe it will, and is then sent to the Senate, and there is a vote that we don't see that's like, well, the Senate parliamentarian came out and said that Chuck Schumer wasn't able to play hopscotch in the proper way, and so that means the vote will not happen, and then we will have to push it back. If there is a vote, and the Senate parliamentarian isn't like doing voodoo witchcraft in the basement to stop it, then it should pass the House and Senate. We have the votes. Again, I've talked about this time and time again. The vast majority of Americans support Ukraine. The vast majority of people in the House support Ukraine. The vast majority of people in the Senate support Ukraine.
Chipping in. You're doing God's work.
Hey, my second 100 Danish, not Danish. Whoa. I just made a big Nordic mistake. Another Norwegian donation of 100 Danish. It again. I hope my Norwegian, I sincerely apologize to the Norwegian community for any offense that I may have caused. I do not mean to offend you, and if it would help you, I will, like, I don't know, I'll drink out of like a big horn and I don't know, throw an axe at, I don't know what you guys do for. I've been to Denmark, I've been to Estonia, I've been to Finland. I haven't been to Norway, but I do want to go there. So, no, I'll have to get very familiar with not calling you Danes in the near future if I want to not get all the locals angry at me. Bring the horn, okay. If I bring the horn, apparently I get the pass. I get the Norwegian pass. So I don't think that the problem is whether or not this can pass the House and Senate. This should easily pass the House and Senate, especially since the vast majority of the support is alone. I mean, this, like, when you hear like pro-Ukraine Republican critiques of, well, I don't like just giving them stuff, even though if you're investing in America's security and you're also trying to fulfill America's promises, that investing in this is something that benefits us, and Ukraine's long-term security is connected to our long-term security. And so you also want the state to be stable so the state can continue to defend itself. And the state having more debts that it has to pay off means less capital available to, say, invest in their own defense, invest in their own reconstruction, or otherwise. Nevertheless, the vast majority of the funds available in this bill is a loan. So I think that will also assist it in getting the votes that it needs in the Senate and in the House. The main problem I have with this is going to be presidential veto. We are going to need a 2/3 majority in the House and the Senate if we want to take the power to veto this away from the President of the United States. That means we don't just need the 218 people who signed this discharge petition to vote in favor of this. We need the vast, vast, vast majority of people in the Congress and House and the Senate to vote in favor to take the question off the table from Trump, and so he can't veto it. Because I can see it right now. Because Trump said yesterday that peace is right around the corner, right? Now, if you hear that and you think inside Donald Trump's brain it looks like this right now, you wouldn't be far off. But that is his stated position. Whether it's because he wants Jared Kushner's college buddies to be on the ground floor in Russian investment deals so they can profit themselves over America's interests, maybe. If it's because he has a personal relationship with Vladimir Putin that he wants to continue to coddle, maybe. Is it because Donald Trump doesn't like the fact that Zelensky polls better than him, and every single poll that's ever been done comparing him to Donald Trump in the United States with the people that he is supposed to represent? Maybe. Whatever it is, there is a high risk of Donald Trump vetoing it. And so when I read about this legislation, I remember the New York Times said something along the lines of, here it is right here. Although the chances of the bill being passed remain low due to widespread Republican opposition and Trump's stance, the success of the petition is a blow to Speaker Johnson. It is, because it shows that he can be gone around. He is already struggling to maintain control of the entire House of Representatives with only a minimal voting majority. I don't know if I agree with this assessment from the New York Times. I think this was something that was just kind of like coddled together at the last second. I'm not saying that when we say the chances are low, I would put the chances like at 40%. Not a majority is actually still not the most likely outcome, but I would still say it has significant chances. Number one, when they say there's Republican opposition. Yes, there is Republican opposition for just pure Ukraine aid bills. This is not just an aid bill. The vast majority of the sums here are loans. It's part of the Lend-Lease program. That's the first thing. The second thing is this also has to do with sanctions. And Republicans across the board are much, much, much more in favor of sanctioning Russia and making them have to pay for it, because that's a lot easier to argue to their constituents than, no, I actually use taxpayer dollars for this. Right? That's much easier to argue. So there's that as well. But also, the last time we had a vote on Ukraine aid, there were still a lot of Republicans that voted in favor. Not a majority. A majority did not. But as we know, the Democrats are consistent on this. Every single Democrat in the House votes in favor of Ukraine aid. Every single Democrat in the House votes in favor of Ukraine aid. So it's not like you're going to have a bipartisan majority where you get some Democrats and some Republicans. No, you're going to have a bipartisan majority of every single Democrat, and the last bit of Republicans just need to get us over the 2/3. Now, I cannot tell you if that would balance out to being the 2/3 necessary to get this over the line, because maybe it won't. I'll be honest with you. Maybe it won't. But also, there's a scenario where this bill goes onto Donald Trump's desk. He has the opportunity to veto it, and then he doesn't. And the reason he doesn't is because Ukraine is very popular right now. The polling for Ukraine and supporting Ukraine is in the majority, and not a small majority, not a decent majority, but a large majority. The vast majority of independents going into a midterm election support aid to Ukraine. And basically every single Democrat supports aid to Ukraine, and about a third of Republicans support aid to Ukraine, or at least assistance to Ukraine. And so if you're trying to win a midterm election, if you're trying to show that your 24-hour peace deal wasn't just a lie you delivered to the American public in order to get you into power again and avoid criminal charges that he was facing down from all angles, then you got to do something. I mean, what is he going to say after he vetoes it? I'm vetoing it because this undermines my peacemaking efforts, and peace is right around the corner. Before then, peace does not occur at all. I mean, the thing is, this vote is in June. This is the first week of June the vote is supposed to happen. And then how long until the midterms? You got June, you got July, and then you got August, and then the midterms is September, October, November. So that's a lot of time. That's a lot of time between him vetoing the legislation and month on month on month on month failure to support Ukraine. Failure to bring about an end to the war. Failure to move the needle whatsoever. And so there could be a part of Trump, even from a cynical calculus, where maybe he doesn't sign the bill, but he lets the bill pass by without his signature, understanding that this will add, this could add some pressure to the Russians. Maybe that's not something that gets through his skull, but it should. And that it's popular. And you're going into a midterm election where it's not like he can just flip the switch on the economy and fix it overnight. Obviously, a war can be a little bit more complicated than that. And he started a war, and you got to finish your peas, you got to finish your corn, you got to finish your vegetables before, you can move on to anything else. So I think that there could be motivations to keep Trump from vetoing the legislation. On the other hand, Donald Trump, from what I hear in the reporting in my circles, as well as some stuff that's already been reported publicly, but also just, what you hear from the rumor mill, is that Donald Trump wants a peace deal by the time the midterms run around in order to pitch it to the American people that he fulfilled his promise on bringing an end to the war in Ukraine. Now, to be clear, he didn't fulfill his promise. He said 24 hours. Even if he ended the war tomorrow, he would not have fulfilled his promise. Because the amount of people who died between the first 24 hours of his presidency and now is quite substantive. Quite substantive. So he's not going to be able to fulfill that promise, period. But if he can get pressure on Zelensky, at least from his perspective, by blocking aid like this, maybe in Trump's mind, he's sending a signal to Zelensky that he needs to compromise, that we can cut off aid to Ukraine, we can cut off support to Ukraine, we can strangle support to Ukraine and stop it from getting to you, and that you should make a deal for that reason. Now, has that worked over the last nearly 500 days? No. In fact, all reporting seems to indicate that Zelensky right now is more bullish than he has been in any other time during the Trump presidency. That the combination of Viktor Orban being yeeted out of office, the slowdown of Russian advances across the front line, even if Konstantinivka is still being pressured, and it's still something I think people should be focusing on, as well as advancements in Ukraine's drone attack strategy and hitting Russia at home. The fact that a 3-day operation has turned into something where Zelensky is saying the Russians have permission to have a Victory Day parade. We won't bomb it because Trump asked us to, even if the Russians immediately violate that ceasefire, both undermining their own reputation, which, I mean, how much lower can you get, but also undermining Trump's credibility. So if Trump vetoes this legislation, aid that Ukraine didn't think they were going to get in the first place anyway, is that going to make Ukraine cave? Is that going to make Ukraine give up the Donbass? Or, as Peskov is recently starting to say, he's starting to say, oh, we need to go back to, He's starting to suggest Kherson and Zaporizhia again, like ridiculous demands. Whether that is an attempt to push the Ukrainians to accept Donbass where it is, reporting seems to indicate that the Russians are of the belief that we take Donbass by August, then we press on for more. Kherson, Zaporizhia, keep going, keep going, keep going. So the odds of Trump being able to pressure Zelensky to make the concessions necessary to make the Russians stop firing for now, just for now, I think that isn't particularly likely. And the odds of an immediate Russian economic collapse without new factors being introduced, that's unlikely. That's something that would take more time, would probably be down the line, down the road, not in the immediate term. So all of this together seems to indicate that despite what the New York Times says, when they say the bill remains low, the chances of passage, I would say their odds are sizable. But I would say, despite sizable odds, that it's still, I would put it around like 40%. I would still say it's not the most likely outcome for the reason that Donald Trump can be spiteful. Donald Trump has held up Ukraine aid even when it had a veto-proof majority. If anybody remembers what happened back in 2019, when they tried to hold on to Ukraine aid in order to juice some politically useful information out of the Ukrainians on Hunter Biden and his father, Joe Biden. And of course, Donald Trump's beefing with the Ukrainians, the meeting in the White House, his longstanding relationship with Vladimir Putin. I think there's a bunch of reasons as to why he could say, I'm going to veto it anyway. Regardless, though, this is the best chance Ukraine aid has had in passing during the Trump administration since he has gotten in office. And secondly, the fact that we're at this point is an indication that Ukraine aid and support for Ukraine and sentiment to get Ukraine the assistance it needs to force the Russians to go to the negotiating table instead of just asking nicely is in a much better position than many of Ukrainian aid critics would have you believe. That Thomas Massey and others would have you believe. Mike Lee and gang. So I would say that right now I'm feeling pretty good. I'm feeling pretty good about what this means, about the chance of this getting through, which might not be the majority, but it's still a sizable odd. And I'm also encouraged about what this means for a possible aid bill come 2027 if the Democrats take back the House, and especially if they take back the Senate. So I'm not trying to be on too much hopium, but currently I'm trying not to overdose.